Okay, so I wanted to cook for Elvis, and this is at Graceland, and I was going to make pasta and spaghetti.
Priscilla Presley spent more than half a century choosing every word carefully. Every interview was a masterclass in deflection. Every smile was a shield. Every answer she gave about life with Elvis was polished, practiced, and deliberately incomplete. But something broke open in recent years. Maybe it was the grief. Maybe it was the exhaustion of carrying someone else's mythology on her back for 60 years. Whatever it was, Priscilla stopped protecting the ghost of Elvis Presley. And what she finally admitted doesn't just challenge the fairy tale, it demolishes it. We need to talk about what actually happened, not the version you saw in the documentaries, not the version Graceland sells on coffee mugs and tour packages. The real version. The one Priscilla buried so deep inside herself that it took losing almost everything she loved before she could finally say it out loud. She was 14 years old. Let that land for a moment. 14, a ninth grader, a child. And Elvis Presley was 24, already the most famous entertainer on the planet, stationed in Germany with the US Army when a mutual friend brought her to a party at his off-base house. The way the story has always been told, it sounds romantic. A young girl catches the eye of a legend. He's captivated by her innocence, her beauty, her quiet presence. She's starstruck but composed. It sounds like the opening scene of a love story written by fate itself. But Priscilla has started telling a very different version of that night, and it strips the romance right down to the bone. Elvis didn't just notice her. He studied her. He saw something in her that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with control. She was young enough to shape, young enough to mold, young enough to turn into exactly the kind of woman he wanted because she hadn't yet become a woman at all. And that distinction matters more than anything else in this story. Elvis Presley did not fall in love with a person that night. He found a project, a blank canvas, a girl whose identity was still forming, which meant he could form it for her. Within months, he was telling her how to do her hair. The jet black dye, the heavy eyeliner, the teased volume that became her signature look for decades, none of that was Priscilla. That was Elvis. He designed her appearance the way a director designs a character. He chose her clothes. He told her which colors to wear, which styles suited his taste, which shoes matched his vision of what his woman should look like walking beside him. She has described this process not with anger, but with a kind of quiet devastation. Because at the time, she didn't see it as control. She saw it as love. She thought he was paying attention to her. She thought he cared so deeply that he wanted every detail of her to be perfect. It took her decades to understand that perfection wasn't the goal. Ownership was. And it didn't stop at appearance. When Priscilla eventually moved to Memphis to be closer to Elvis, her entire social world was dictated by him. He decided who she could spend time with. He decided what she could do during the day while he slept. He decided when she was allowed to leave the house and when she needed to stay. She has talked about feeling like Graceland was the most beautiful prison ever built. From the outside, it looked like paradise, a young woman living in a mansion with the most desired man in America. From the inside, it felt like a slow, disappearing act. Every day, a little more of who Priscilla actually was got erased and replaced with whoever Elvis needed her to be that week. The most haunting thing Priscilla has said about those early years is that she lost herself so completely she couldn't remember who she was before him. Think about that. She entered his world at 14. By the time she was 18, 19, 20, she had no frame of reference for her own identity outside of Elvis. No independent friendships, no career, no sense of self that wasn't filtered through his approval. She was the most envied woman in America, and she was nobody. She had everything the world told her she should want, and she had nothing that was actually hers. And here is where most people think they know the rest of the story. They think it was a turbulent marriage that ended in a sad but civilized divorce. They think Elvis was a flawed but loving man who simply couldn't keep his demons in check. They think Priscilla moved on, built a career, and found peace. But they are wrong. Because the way Elvis controlled how Priscilla looked and who she talked to was just the surface. What happened behind the closed doors of that mansion in the dark hours when the world wasn't watching was something Priscilla kept locked away for over 50 years. And she had very good reasons to stay silent. Until now. Life inside Graceland operated on a clock that didn't belong to the real world. Elvis slept during the day and came alive after midnight. The curtains stayed drawn around the clock, thick enough to block every trace of sunlight, turning the mansion into a permanent twilight zone. Priscilla adapted to his rhythm because she had no choice. Her mornings disappeared. Her afternoons dissolved into silent waiting. Her existence revolved entirely around the moment Elvis decided to wake up and acknowledge that she was there. She has described those years as living inside a beautiful darkness, and she means that in every possible sense of the word. When Elvis was awake, the house was never theirs. The Memphis Mafia, his loyal entourage of cousins, friends, bodyguards, and hangers-on, occupied every corner of Graceland at all hours. They ate his food, watched his televisions, laughed at his jokes, and followed his moods like weather vanes in a storm. Priscilla was technically the lady of the house, but in practice, she ranked somewhere below the inner circle. She couldn't have a private dinner with her own husband. She couldn't have a private conversation without someone overhearing. She was surrounded by people every single day and had never felt more alone in her life. The entourage wasn't just company, it was surveillance. Everything Priscilla said or did could get reported back to Elvis, and she learned very quickly that the wrong word at the wrong moment could shift his mood from warmth to ice in a heartbeat. And those mood shifts became the rhythm of her existence. Elvis could be the most magnetic, generous, tender man in any room. He could make Priscilla feel like the center of the universe with a single look. But something would change without warning. A phone call, a bad review, a pill wearing off. And suddenly the charm would vanish and something colder would take its place. He would withdraw completely, refusing to speak to her for hours, sometimes days, leaving her desperate to figure out what she had done wrong. The answer was usually nothing. She had done nothing wrong. But the cycle of warmth and withdrawal kept her emotionally tethered to him in a way that she couldn't break, because every time he pulled away, the return of his affection felt like oxygen after drowning. She didn't have the language for it back then, nobody did. But what Priscilla was experiencing inside that mansion was textbook trauma bonding, and it was happening so gradually that she mistook it for devotion. Then, there were the pills. Elvis's pharmaceutical dependency didn't explode overnight. It crept in slowly, prescription by prescription, doctor by doctor, each one too starstruck or too paid off to say no. Priscilla watched it happen in real time. She would see him swallow a handful of pills before bed and another handful to get moving the next evening. She would watch his eyes glaze over and his speech thicken and his personality fracture into someone she barely recognized. The man who had swept her off her feet in Germany was disappearing behind a chemical fog, and there was nothing she could do about it. She tried talking to him. She tried talking to the people around him. Nobody listened. Nobody wanted to be the one to tell the king he had a problem. And so Priscilla stood in that beautiful house, watching the man she loved slowly destroy himself, completely powerless to stop it. The most painful contradiction of all lived in the intimate corners of their marriage. Elvis had rigid, almost puritanical expectations about Priscilla's purity and femininity, yet he surrounded himself with a revolving door of women who represented the exact opposite. He placed Priscilla on a pedestal so high she could barely breathe up there, and after the birth of Lisa Marie in 1968, something fundamental between them fractured. Priscilla has been measured in how she discusses this, but the implication is devastating. Motherhood, in Elvis's eyes, changed what she was to him. The woman he had sculpted since she was a teenager no longer fit the image he needed, and he began to look elsewhere without apology. Priscilla was trapped inside a life that millions envied and no one understood. But even the most elaborate cage has a door, and Priscilla was about to find hers, though the cost of walking through it would be higher than she ever imagined. The man who finally made Priscilla feel like a human being again wasn't a movie star, or a musician, or anyone the world would have expected. His name was Mike Stone, and he was her karate instructor. It sounds almost absurd on the surface, but what happened between them wasn't about glamour or rebellion or revenge. It was about something far simpler and far more devastating. Mike Stone talked to Priscilla like she was a person. He asked her what she thought. He asked her what she wanted. He looked at her and saw a woman with her own mind, her own desires, her own right to exist outside of someone else's shadow. For Priscilla, that experience was so foreign, so completely unfamiliar after nearly a decade of being Elvis Presley's carefully constructed creation, that it cracked something open inside her she didn't even know was still alive. She has described the affair not as a betrayal of her marriage, but as an awakening from a sleep she didn't realize she had fallen into. For the first time in her adult life, someone was treating her like she mattered on her own terms. When Elvis found out, the reaction was not what Hollywood would later soften into a dignified heartbreak. Elvis Presley did not quietly accept that his wife had found someone else. According to multiple people in his inner circle, including former members of the Memphis Mafia who later wrote about it openly, Elvis talked about having Mike Stone killed. He said it more than once. He said it with enough conviction that the people around him weren't entirely sure he was bluffing. Whether it was genuine intent or the spiraling rage of a man deep in pharmaceutical dependency and crumbling ego, the reality remains the same. Priscilla's decision to leave didn't just risk her reputation or her financial security. In her mind, and in the minds of the people who heard what Elvis was saying behind closed doors, it may have put lives in genuine danger. The divorce was finalized in 1973, and the terms tell a story all by themselves. Priscilla Presley walked away from one of the wealthiest entertainers in history with a settlement that, by celebrity standards, was shockingly modest. She received a cash payment, some property, and spousal support that would eventually end. She didn't fight for more. She didn't try to expose him. She didn't leverage what she knew about his drug use or his behavior or his private world to extract a larger piece of his fortune. She simply wanted out. And when a woman who has spent nearly her entire adult life inside a gilded mansion chooses to leave with almost nothing rather than stay one more day, that tells you more about what that mansion felt like than any interview ever could. But leaving Elvis didn't mean escaping him. Priscilla has spoken about the years immediately following the divorce as the most disorienting period of her entire life. She was a woman in her late 20s who had never built an identity of her own. Since the age of 14, every choice had been filtered through Elvis: what to wear, how to speak, who to be, and now, suddenly, nobody was telling her anything. The freedom she had fought for felt more like freefall. She didn't know what she liked. She didn't know what she was good at. She didn't know who Priscilla Presley was when you stripped away the last name and everything it carried. She has said that rebuilding herself from nothing was harder than any year she spent inside Graceland, because at least inside Graceland the walls told her where to stand. Then, on August 16, 1977, Elvis died alone on the bathroom floor of that same mansion. He was 42 years old. The cause was cardiac arrest, tangled up in the pharmaceutical dependency that Priscilla had watched consume him for years. And Priscilla's grief was unlike anything simple or clean. She mourned the man she had loved as a girl. She mourned the man who had controlled her. She mourned the man she had fled from, and the man she still, in some fractured way, felt tethered to. And then something happened that would define the next 5 decades of her life. She became the keeper of his legacy, the protector of the very myth she had barely survived. And that silence she chose, it was about to cost her more than anyone could have predicted. For nearly 50 years after Elvis died, Priscilla Presley became the most dedicated guardian of his mythology. She transformed Graceland into a pilgrimage site that draws millions of visitors from around the world. She oversaw the licensing, the merchandise, the careful curation of every story that reached the public. She gave interviews where she smiled warmly and spoke about Elvis with affection and diplomacy, never revealing too much, never letting the cracks show, never saying anything that might tarnish the golden image she had worked so hard to preserve. And the world believed she had made peace with her past. The world believed she had moved on. But the truth was far more complicated. Priscilla wasn't at peace. She was standing guard, and the weight of that silence was crushing her slowly from the inside. Then her world started collapsing in ways that no amount of legacy protection could prevent. In July of 2020, her grandson Benjamin Keogh died by suicide. He was 27 years old, Lisa Marie's only son, Priscilla's only grandson. The loss shattered something fundamental in the family, a grief so massive that it swallowed everything else. Priscilla has rarely spoken publicly about Benjamin's death, but those close to her have described a woman who was struggling to hold herself together while holding everyone else up, and she barely had time to breathe before the next blow came. In January of 2023, Lisa Marie Presley died suddenly from complications of a previous surgery. She was 54 years old. Priscilla had now lost her daughter, the only child she had ever had, the baby she brought into the world at Graceland all those decades ago when she still believed her life with Elvis might turn into something beautiful. The grief was unimaginable. But even in the middle of that grief, Priscilla found herself dragged into something ugly and public. A legal battle erupted over Lisa Marie's trust and estate, pitting Priscilla against her own grandchildren, Riley and the twins Harper and Finley. The family that had already endured so much was now fractured by lawyers and courtrooms and accusations about money and control. Priscilla was burying her daughter while fighting to hold on to whatever was left of her family, and something inside her shifted. The need to protect Elvis's legacy suddenly felt less important than it ever had before. What was the point of guarding a myth when everything real in her life was falling apart? What was the point of staying silent when silence had cost her so much already? The walls Priscilla had built around the truth started crumbling, and for the first time in her life, she seemed willing to let them fall. The release of Sofia Coppola's film Priscilla in 2023 became an unexpected catalyst. The movie told the entire story from Priscilla's perspective, not Elvis the legend, but Priscilla the girl. It showed the isolation, the control, the slow erasure of her identity inside that beautiful prison. And watching her own life reflected back on screen forced Priscilla to confront things she had spent decades minimizing. She couldn't dismiss it as exaggeration because she had lived it. She couldn't pretend it wasn't that bad because the evidence was her own memory staring back at her in a darkened theater. The film didn't just tell her story to the world, it made her finally reckon with what that story actually meant. Since then, Priscilla's interviews have carried a different weight. She uses words now that she never used before. Controlled, manipulated, lost. These are not the words of a woman protecting a legacy. These are the words of a woman who has decided that her truth matters more than his myth. At 79 years old, after 6 decades of carefully chosen silences, Priscilla Presley is finally speaking like someone who has nothing left to lose and everything left to say. And perhaps that is the most important part of this entire story. Not the revelations about Elvis, though those matter, but the revelation about Priscilla herself. She was 14 when she walked into his world. She spent the next 60 years being defined by him, shaped by him, silenced by him, and then burdened with protecting him even after he was gone. And now, at the end of that long road, she is finally just Priscilla. Not his wife, not his widow, not his legacy keeper, just herself. And claiming that identity after everything she survived might be the bravest thing she has ever done. If this story moved you, we want to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and tell us whether you think Priscilla waited too long to speak or whether this was the only way she could have survived. Subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss another story that goes beneath the surface of the headlines everyone else is afraid to touch.